Alrighty, good morning, everybody, and welcome. My name is Matt. Great to have you all here today. We're here to talk a little bit about the use of PowerSchool with Schoology and getting that grade passback set up. As you have questions, you're welcome to ask away, and as I see them in the chat, I'll be sure to take care of them. And of course, at the end, I'll be sure to leave some time at the end for some questions as well. My name is Matt. I've been with Schoology for a few years now, but I did have a chance to use it as a secondary science teacher with blended classes, virtual classes, professional development. So I've had a chance to see it from a few different angles. With today, again, we're all about PowerSchool and PowerTeacher Pro and how Schoology communicates with it. So right now with PowerSchool is able to send data to your Schoology courses to populate them on a nightly basis. So as teachers, your courses will be updated for you automatically. Those rosters will be handled for you automatically. Every night, if you have a new student that is in your course, the next day they will be in your course in Schoology. If you have a new student that leaves your roster, or if you have a student that leaves your roster in PowerSchool, they will leave your course in Schoology. But you would still be able to perhaps view their old grades, so that way you can send it to the new teacher. So your rosters in Schoology are managed for you automatically by PowerSchool. What you have in PowerSchool is going to be what you have in Schoology. Along with that, items that you grade in Schoology can also be passed back into PowerSchool. And this is all handled by the teacher. The teacher has the ability to sync various assignments, discussions, assessments, and things like that back into their PowerSchool gradebook. And that's what we'll be looking at today. What you do as a teacher to get that connection set up, and how do you initiate those syncs and what that looks like. So just kind of keep in mind that your rosters in Schoology are automatically created and managed for you by PowerSchool on a nightly basis. And Schoology is able to send your grades back into PowerSchool for you, which is pretty cool. So that first step for getting started with that sync is in PowerSchool, you are going to want to make sure that you have your categories set up. Now, whether these are created by your district admins or if these are created by the teacher, either one, but first make sure that your categories in PowerSchool are there before you go into Schoology and begin working within your courses. So for example, if I was going to look at my PowerSchool account, let's say today my name is Robert. So as Robert, I'm going to have a look at my schedule. And as I'm looking at my schedule, I see that I have a couple of classes here, and I want to look at my algebra class. Okay, well, let me go into my PowerTeacher Pro. And from PowerTeacher Pro, I want to take a look at my categories. To take a look at my categories, I can click into grading over here on the left side, and I'll have a section there for categories. When I click into these categories, now I can see, okay, so I have a category for classwork, project, quiz, test, group project, and homework. Now I can't make any changes to these categories now. I'm only here with a read-only view, but you'll want to have your categories created and assigned to your courses in PowerTeacher Pro before you begin to work within Schoology. Also, if any of your categories are weighted, you'll want to kind of take note of what those weights are. None of these are weighted at this time, so I won't worry about the weights. But of course, if you're weighted here in PowerTeacher Pro, you'll also want to have them weighted within Schoology. So first step is we want to make sure that we have our categories set up in PowerSchool, in our PowerTeacher Pro. Once we have our categories created in PowerTeacher Pro, then we will go into Schoology to create matching categories. So from there, we log into Schoology, click into our course, go into our grade setup, and create our categories. As we're creating our categories in Schoology, it will be important to make sure that we are selecting total points. So in my course, for example, here's my Schoology course. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here just a little bit. Didn't realize how far I was out. In my course here, on the left side, I'll have grade setup. So again, I will click on grade setup, take a look at my categories, and add any of the categories in Schoology that I currently have in PowerSchool. And as I'm creating them, I want to make sure that they have the total points. So I'll click into my grade setup. Once inside of my grade setup here, I can see here are my categories. Now I already have them created for this course, but for your brand new courses for the next school year, you'll likely have to create your categories. And you can create your categories by clicking Add up here. As I click Add, I can create my different categories, whether it's like classwork or homework or maybe projects. Whatever categories I have in my PowerTeacher Pro. So within PowerTeacher Pro with my course, I'll want to make sure that I have the same categories here in Schoology. And you can see as I'm creating my categories here, I have an option, calculated by total points. That is your default. Leave it as that. Because Schoology sends over the raw score, whatever that score is for those assignments, those assessments, those discussions, into PowerSchool. So leave it as total points. So now we have our categories in PowerSchool. We have our categories in Schoology. So that is our second step. Make sure we have our categories in Schoology. And be sure to make the weights the same as the weights that you have in PowerSchool. When you're looking at your weights, your categories in Schoology, you can weigh them by clicking on Weight Categories up here. Now, again, our categories for our session today are not weighted. They're not weighted in PowerTeacher Pro or PowerSchool. They're not weighted. So we're not going to worry about weighting them in Schoology. But if you have to weight them in Schoology, click on the checkbox here, and you can put your weights in. Let's say, for example, maybe classwork is worth 10, group projects are worth 20, homework is worth 10, projects is worth 20. And I can adjust all the different numbers in the box here. I'll make quizzes worth 20 and tests worth 10. So if this is what your weights look like in your PowerTeacher Pro gradebook, be sure to also adjust them here in Schoology. Anytime you make changes on this page, you will also want to click Save Changes to save those. So now that we have our categories created in PowerSchool, and we have our categories created in Schoology to match those categories that we have in PowerSchool, what we are going to do is configure our PowerSchool app for each of our courses. So as we're looking at our course, we can see that there is going to be a PowerSchool app on the left side of our course. And that is where we are going to then click to configure it. Now, if I click back into my course, on the left side of the course here, we can see PowerSchool. Great. So I click on my PowerSchool app here. And once I click on PowerSchool app, we are going to have a look at the configuration. Don't worry about the sync grades. This is what we'll get back to this later. We have a couple of different ways to go about syncing, but let's click on our configuration. Once you click on configuration, we'll be brought to the main page where we can set up that connection between our PowerTeacher Pro gradebook and Schoology. So from here, we can see here are our Schoology course categories. And we can say, okay, so our classwork category in Schoology is going to feed into our classwork PowerSchool category. Our group project category in Schoology is going to feed into our group project PowerSchool category. So we have these little drop downs here where we can select which category in Schoology will feed into a particular category in PowerSchool. And this is why we want to make the names the same. It makes it very easy to set this page up. And I'll keep in mind, any Schoology categories that are not mapped to a PowerSchool category will not be included in the sync. So if you have an additional Schoology category here that is not mapped to anything in PowerSchool, well, those grades, they will just sit within Schoology. They will not go into PowerSchool. So not everything goes into PowerSchool potentially, depending how you have your categories set up, depending how you're syncing. Another really important part about this page that you'll want to keep in mind is that up here at the top, we can see there's a section. PowerSchool limits the characters for our assignment titles to 50 characters. What this means is any Schoology assignments that have, or assessments or discussions, any of those items that you create in Schoology that have more than 50 characters would not be able to sync. So here we can check this box to automatically shorten those titles. Now it says assignment titles, but this counts for your discussions, your assignments, your assessments in Schoology, any of those graded items that have more than 50 characters will be shortened, so that way it will sync over correctly, because anything with more than 50 characters will not be able to sync. This is another important button that you'll want to click on. So in our courses, or with our course in Schoology, we've made sure that our first step is we set up our categories in our PowerSchool gradebook. Then we set up our categories from the grade setup in Schoology. So once we have our categories in Schoology, then we're ready to click on our PowerSchool app at the left side here. And within the PowerSchool app, we have our configuration. With our configuration is where we'll map those categories and also select that we want to automatically shorten our assignment titles. So we've now successfully configured our PowerSchool application for our courses. And again, just as a reminder, be sure that you do check the automatically shorten the assignment titles. That way, everything will get synced over correctly. Now, once we have mapped everything over how we'd like it to be, we will want to make sure that we also click to save our changes. So if I'm back inside of my configuration page here, I've checked my box, I've mapped all my categories appropriately, I'm ready to click Save Changes. Once you click Save Changes, we're ready for the next step. little notes to keep in mind. If you all are using section linking in Schoology, you will need to select each individual section on its own. So by setting 1, it's not going to set it automatically for all of them. You will still need to toggle and view your next sections to set up each of those category mappings individually. That is if you're using section linking. If you're not using section linking, don't worry about that step. Just remember that you do have to configure the PowerSchool application here on the left side of your courses for each section or each course that you have in Schoology. In terms of like custom categories and things like that, they're only associated with the lead teacher in the PowerSchool section, and PowerSchool only allows assignment names to be 50 characters, which is why you will want to select automatically shorten assignment titles. 50 characters is not very much. You'll very quickly run out of characters if you don't select that box. So now let's start taking a look at grades and how we can sync those grades over, what that process looks like in Schoology, and how everything comes over into PowerSchool. So if I'm looking at my course here, I have my course. Let's say maybe I just want to create an assignment here, so I'll click Add Materials, Add Assignment. As you're creating your assignments in Schoology, again, you can call them whatever you like. So I'll just call this, we'll call it assignment 61821, number 2. When you're creating your assignments in Schoology, for the sync into PowerSchool, you will want to give them a due date, because if you don't give them a due date, what's going to happen is it's going to set that due date to the last day of the grading period. For example, we can see here on my assignment that my grading period is semester 2, January 30th to July 7th, or sorry, July 30th. If I leave my due date blank here, it's going to put a due date as 7:30, which might not accurately represent the due date of that particular assignment. So to get it to show up appropriately in the appropriate place with the appropriate due date, let me go ahead and set a due date for, let's say, the 17th. So I have a due date now set for the 17th, and now I want to have a category. Whichever category that I assign here for this assignment, it's going to come into PowerSchool with that same category. So let's say with this assignment, I would like to set it as classwork. Okay, so I select my category as classwork. I do want it to sync, so I'll leave my little checkbox there as sync to SIS, and I won't worry about the rest of the options for our session today. So now I'm ready to create. I've given it a due date, I've given it a category, and I've set it up to sync. And now here is my assignment. And you see I have another assignment here as well, but there is no due date on that one. So we're also going to be able to see, well, how does this come over? So I've got one assignment without a due date and one assignment with a due date. Let's have a look at our gradebook. So on the left side of my course here, I'm going to click on my gradebook. And now we can see our gradebook here with all of the different assignments in our classes. For me personally, I always like to set my view to show full titles because when I'm looking at my Schoology gradebook, I always like to see the full names. Maybe we want to also organize it by due date ascending, due date descending. And I set it to due date descending just so that way I can see my assignment here show up a little bit more easily. I think it's great that we can organize our grade books by due date in Schoology as we're looking at them. A really important note to keep in mind is that with the sync, when you're connecting your Schoology gradebook to PowerSchool, you only ever make changes within the Schoology gradebook and let those changes get synced into PowerSchool. So I've got some grades here I want to fill in. So let's say I'll go ahead and put in some grades. And we'll get to see what these numbers look like in a little bit once they're inside of our PowerSchool gradebook. In Schoology, we also have some little flags here. These flags, to go along with our assignments in Schoology, these live within Schoology. Now, for like Casey here, I can set this as excused. I can click on the flag again, and maybe I want to set Simone as incomplete. And I'm also going to set William as missing because I want to see how do these come in. We can see all of our numbers here, 70, 80, 90, 100, 70, 80. But what if it has these little Schoology flags? What does that look like when that grade gets synced? On the bottom right here, you'll also have these little comment boxes, these little text bubbles. And with these little text bubbles, I can click on those to create a grade comment for a student. So let's say, for example, for Amy. These comments transfer as well. We have a checkbox here for display to student. These comments will transfer whether we are displaying to student or not. So let's say I'll leave that one without the display to student. And let's make another one for like Lindsay. This one is displayed to the student. So we can see how those will look different. So now we have two comments, one that's being displayed to the student and one that's not. We also have an excused, an incomplete, and a missing. We can see in Schoology, excused and incomplete, it fills in a little dash here, while the missing puts in a 0. One of the ways that we can sync our grades is when we're looking at our grade book in Schoology, up at the top here, we have a couple of arrows. And these little arrows here will allow us to sync any changes that we have in our Schoology gradebook into PowerSchool. Of course, keep in mind, only make your grade changes from Schoology and let those get synced into PowerSchool. So I'm going to go ahead and sync my grades. So I'll click on Sync Changes here. And once I click to sync, it will then sync everything. Next to that, you'll also see a little kind of like a clipboard. And this is our View Sync Status Log. When you click on this, you'll be able to see all of your assignments. When did it last sync? And was it successful? It's also from here, you can click Sync Changes to sync everything, or you can sync individual assignments, which is kind of neat. So at the bottom here, we can see this is the assignment that I made today, assignment 6/18/21, number 2. It's still currently queued. It's still currently syncing. Now, with us getting into summer school, I imagine the process is the process for syncing is going to be a little bit quicker, because there's not going to be as many teachers syncing right now. But generally, as you get, like, let's say towards the end of the end of a grading period, the end of a quarter, the end of a semester, and things like that, the syncing process does take a little bit longer, just because there are more clients, more districts that are all actively syncing at the same time to wrap up the grades books. But we can see now I have synced this assignment here. It has been successful. And in just a little bit, we're going to have a look at our gradebook in PowerTeacher Pro to see what that looks like. So the assignment that I just synced was this one right here. I can continue to make changes here. So let's say for Amy, maybe I want to change that grade from an 80 to 100. If I do that, I just need to sync it again. And then that 100 can get passed into PowerTeacher Pro, into my PowerSchool gradebook. So again, any changes that you ever make, anytime you want to update any of your students' grades, always make those changes in Schoology, never in PowerTeacher Pro. So let's have a look to see if we can find that assignment. We're looking for assignment 6/18/21, number 2. Let's see if we can find that. So once I'm back inside of PowerTeacher, I'm going to click back into my assignments here. And let's see, when we're looking at our PowerTeacher gradebook, we'll need to make sure that we're looking at the appropriate grading period. So it looks like I'm still looking at semester 1. So I'm going to click into, let's have a look at semester 2 to see if it's there. Oh, here we are. So now I'm looking at semester 2, quarter 4, and I have the appropriate due dates. Now, if y'all remember, that very first assignment that I showed y'all before I created a new one was called assignment June 18th, number 1. And if we look off to the right, we can see that 9 out of 11 students have been scored. And there's the due date, 7/30/2021. The reason why that is the due date, the last day of the grading period, is because I did not set a due date in Schoology. So now I'm left with, okay, the due date is 7/30/2021. But maybe I realized that mistake after I synced. So what if I want to click on my little gear here in Schoology, click edit, and maybe now I want to have a due date. And let's see what happens. Maybe I'll set the due date to the 18th and click Save Changes. And once I've done that, now I can see I have my due date here in Schoology. When I go back into my gradebook, and again, I'm making my changes within Schoology. I am not making my changes within PowerTeacher Pro. So I'm going to click on my clipboard, and I just want to sync this assignment right here. And we'll come back and take a look at that in a little bit. So that was my original June 18th that had a due date for July 30th. And if I look down here, it's going to be number 13, since we are organized by, it looks like, due date. And here it is, 6/18/21, number 2. Here's my assignment that successfully synced into my PowerTeacher Pro gradebook. Off to the right side here, I can see that I have 9 out of 11 of my students have been scored, and I had a due date set for this one for the 17th. Maybe I want to click into this assignment, so I'll go ahead and click into it. And now I can see here are my students' grades. I can see here's Jeffrey with a 70, so let's have a look. I'm going to click out of here, and let's see. Okay, yep, there's Jeffrey with a 70, Brittany with an 80, Daniel with a 90. So we have 80, 90. The grades are looking good. Everything's coming in as it should, it looks like. We have Lindsay. Lindsay here has a comment with her grade. And if remember, I left a comment with Lindsay that should say, this one is displayed to the student. So if I go back into my PowerTeacher and I click on Lindsay, I can see this one is displayed to the student. Great. If I take a look at Amy, I can see, oh, these comments transfer. So both of those comments are there for those students as well. Awesome. Everything's still looking good. And of course, keep in mind, if I want to do any other comments for any other students, I would want to also do those in Schoology and let those get passed into PowerSchool. But what about these flags? If remember with Casey, Simone, and William, I have some flags here. Well, if I'm looking at Casey, I can see with Casey, it's currently blank. So it created a space in the gradebook, but it's empty for Casey when Casey is exempted. For Simone that has an incomplete, I can see that for Simone, it is also empty, an empty space. When you're using Schoology's flags for excused or incomplete, it creates an empty space in the gradebook for that student, and you will want to leave it that way. Don't use any of PowerTeacher Pro's exemptions. For example, we can see on my right side here, I can mark it as incomplete or exempt. You know, I've got my little flags here that I can also put in from PowerTeacher. Don't do that. Because once you begin making changes here, as opposed to Schoology, you will begin breaking that connection or breaking that sync. So you'll want to always be sure you're only making your changes in Schoology. Now, if you take away the flags and update the flags with a number and sync it again, then that new number, of course, would show up there as opposed to the blank space. And now we can see here with William, we marked it as missing. With missing, it put in a 0 for that grade book in Schoology, and that 0 did transfer into your PowerTeacher gradebook. Again, if you're using your flags in Schoology, just remember that excused and incomplete, it is blank. If you mark it as missing, it will put in a 0, and do not overwrite those scores with other flags from PowerTeacher Pro. Only overwrite them from within Schoology. So let's say, for example, if Casey's excused, Casey's always going to have that blank there. That just is what it is. But with Simone, Simone's currently incomplete. Well, maybe once Simone turns it in, we can take away the incomplete flag and say, hey, look, Simone did it. Nice job. We'll put in an 85 for Simone. Maybe it's no longer missing for William, so I can take off the flag for William and say, nice job. William gets a 90. Or I might say, hey, look, William gets a 105. Let's see what happens if I try to sync a 105. Whoops. Out of a 100. And now that I've made my changes here in Schoology's gradebook, I can click on my clipboard and say, okay, maybe I want to sync this specific assignment, which is the June 18th, number 2. So I'll go ahead and sync that one. And now we're going to wait to see how those grades update. In the meantime, let's have a look back at our June 18th, number 1. I resynced it at 8:21 according to the server time for Schoology. So let's have a look to see if that new due date took in PowerTeacher Pro. Remember a few minutes ago, I changed the due date from not having a due date at all to June 18th. Let's see what that looks like here. I'm going to go back into my assignments and refresh. Once I refresh, we'll click into, make sure I'm looking at semester 2. And let's have a look. No longer do we see assignment number 1 there at the top with a due date of 7:30. If I scroll down a little bit, I should see, here we go, we have a due date of June 18th. And off to the left side here, we can see assignment June 18th, number 1. So that new due date has been synced into PowerTeacher Pro. No issue, no problem at all. Let's take a look to see if those new grades have been submitted. So I'm going to click back into my gradebook, click on my clipboard, and let's see, it looks like it's still working, but at least now I can see that here, okay, it's still working, but we've seen that it's very easy to update those due dates. We just change the due date, sync it again. Once this is finished, we're going to take a look to see if those new grades came over as well. So we're just making some changes inside of our PowerTeacher gradebook. I'm sorry, we're just making some changes inside of Schoology to get synced into our PowerTeacher Pro gradebook. While that's happening, an important thing I would like to point out is on the left side of our course here, we have grade setup. Another important feature of our grade setup is going to be found at the bottom of it. So of course, yeah, we have our categories here, super important. But at the bottom, this can be useful to be aware of as well. Within your grade setup, you have a section there called visibility settings. And it's with your visibility settings that you can choose to hide the overall grade in the student grade report or hide the grading period grade in the student grade report. This is just for Schoology. By doing this, what's going to happen is it's going to hide those overall grades in Schoology. So your students or the parents of students would only be able to view the overall average within PowerSchool. But within Schoology, they would still be able to see those individual grades. So if PowerSchool is your official gradebook, if you wanted to, you could choose to hide those grades here, and then students and parents would only see that overall calculated average within PowerSchool, but see the individual grades within Schoology as well. Something I think is just helpful to be aware of, because sometimes I think it's confusing for parents and students as well, if they see two overall grades in two different locations that might not even be the same, that can be potentially confusing for them. So at least for me, I always elected to hide the overall grade here. If you do choose to hide the overall grade, just be sure to click Save Changes. And then your students and parents will go to PowerSchool for that overall average versus Schoology. Let's take a look to see if our grade has finished syncing. All right, looks like it has synced. So let's see, there it is right there. Yep. All right, so we're going to take a look at 6/18/21, number 2. So we'll go back into PowerTeacher Pro, and I'm going to just refresh this page. So again, we're still looking at algebra, semester 2, quarter 4, and let's have a look for this assignment. There it is, 6/18/21, number 2. If I'm looking at it this time, I can see that 10 out of 11 have been scored. Go back to my grade book in Schoology. I should be able to see, okay, so that means that likely it is now just Casey that does not have a score here. Let's have a look. And now we can see that William has a score of 105 and Simone has a score of 85. So whatever numbers that you put here within Schoology, these numbers will get synced over to your grade book. So now William's got a little bit of extra credit. Nice job, William. Then we see Casey has still been exempted, still has a blank space here. we just leave it that way. So now we've seen how we can sync due dates if we've made changes to the due dates, and we've seen how we can sync any grade changes, of course, along with that original grade as well. So we have our sync button within Schoology's gradebook right here to sync everything. We can click on the clipboard to click here to sync everything or to sync individual items. We also have our PowerSchool button here at the left side, and when you click on that, you will see that you have an option to sync here as well and to sync here as well. So we've got a few different places we can initiate that sync. Now, if you'd like to bring some parity between the grades, the Schoology gradebook as well as your PowerSchool gradebook, here's some things that you can do to kind of help ensure that those grades are as close as possible to one another. Use the same number of categories in Schoology as you have in PowerSchool, as well as use the same weights. By using the same weights in Schoology as you have in PowerSchool, it helps make the overall calculation in Schoology appear more like the overall calculation in PowerSchool. You will want to either way set it by total points, because then that will ensure that the grade has been calculated correctly. The PowerSchool application will only take a factor of 1. So if you are setting different factors, like a factor of 2, a factor of 3, a factor of 4, to kind of add in some additional weighting, it's not going to take those other factors, and so that will also cause some discrepancies in your grade. Now, if you're curious about what's factor, where is it at, we can see the factor right here, right above the synced SIS. So for example, like in Schoology, if I change this to a 2, it would make it worth twice as much in Schoology, but it's not going to affect what it's worth once it syncs over. So that also will cause discrepancies with your grading. There's also a nice little checklist here. And what I'll do is I'm going to get this link in the chat, and that way, if you'd like, you can certainly distribute this link for anyone that would like to have access to it for viewing this slideshow that we've been kind of looking at today. And now, just as kind of like a review, what kind of information is transferred from Schoology into PowerSchool? This is the information that transfers. So the name of your graded item, up to 50 characters. How many points is that item worth? What is the due date for that item? What is the category? And what score did the student receive? At the very bottom, we can also see that the gradebook comments have come over in as well. So we've got a lot of things that do transfer. If you don't set the due date, it will automatically select the date at the end of the grading period. When you're ready to sync, you'll notice that as when I was syncing, you had the little the bar that was kind of filling, so you can kind of see what has been synced, what hasn't been synced, when was the last time it was synced. If you're ever having errors, you can generally hover over the icon, and that will display the message that tells you, hey, this is what the error is. But of course, always be sure that when you're looking at syncing, your graded item has a max of 50 characters. And just be aware of that it's the max number of points, the due date, the category, and the raw score that the student received. Those will be the items that transfer. Only make your grade changes in Schoology. So anytime you want to make a change to a student's grade, go to your Schoology course, go into your grade book, and make the changes here within Schoology. Once you've made those changes there, you can then sync those into PowerSchool. So don't make changes within your PowerTeacher Pro. Your PowerTeacher Pro is just there to receive the aggregate, the average, the calculations that come over from Schoology. Don't worry about making the changes here. Only within Schoology. And of course, if you are using linked sections, be sure that you configure each section's categories to map from Schoology into PowerSchool. For those of you that are using linked sections. These questions often come up, so definitely want to include these as well. Right now, we are not able to map grading scales or attendance. So if you're trying to pass back attendance, it's not there yet. If an item is marked as ungraded, as in it does not have a category in Schoology, it will not sync with PowerSchool. And just as a reminder, the Schoology's grade passback to PowerSchool supports a factor of 1 for each assignment. Everything only has a factor of 1. So if you're looking to have items that are weighted, you will want to weigh from the category. Don't weigh from the factor. Otherwise, you're going to see discrepancies in your grades. So each of your items that you create within your courses will have just a factor of 1. So it's just a kind of a review from the top. Your very first step will be to log into your PowerTeacher Pro and take a look at what categories that you have, or create your categories if you're able to create your own categories. Because whatever categories you have in your PowerTeacher Pro gradebook, you will want to then go into your Schoology course and create the same. So here I am, I'm looking at my PowerTeacher Pro, looking at my categories. Do my categories have weights? Do they not? And if they do have weights, that's then when I'll go into Schoology and go into my grade setup and create my same categories here. If they have weights, as I'm adding my categories, I'll give them the total points and set the weights with clicking the checkbox here. So we create our categories in PowerSchool or PowerTeacher Pro, create our categories in Schoology, set the weights so everything is weighed the same, set everything as total points. From there, we click on our PowerSchool button at the very bottom of our course or on the left side of our course and go into our configuration. Once we're in our configuration, we can then map the categories from our we can map the categories from Schoology to our PowerTeacher or PowerSchool gradebook categories. And we'll also want to make sure we shorten those titles. With those first 3 steps, you will have that connection established, and then you're ready to sync. So I know quite a bit of information, but I tried to repeat and look at some things from a few different angles. I always like to leave the last few minutes for any additional comments, additional questions, things like that. There is also a survey and an additional video if you'd like. This is a video that is a great video to review everything that we looked at today from somebody on our product team. So if you'd like to review anything, the session has also been recorded, so you'll have everything from today as well. And for those of you that like surveys, I'm gonna go ahead and get this in the chat as well. My survey is of course optional, and I'm not sure if you all are able to get the link based on how it's streamed, but it's there just in case you are able to. And it will ask you a question about a project code. I have that project code in the chat as well for number 1. So again, with our last few minutes, if you have any other additional questions, comments, or anything like that, Anything I can do to help you out today, I'll be happy to. And I just thought I'd mention, if for those of you, if you are still pretty new to using Schoology, something I think is really neat that Schoology did in the last year is they put this little S at the bottom right, which made their help center a lot more accessible. If you're still new, still getting some experience with using the platform, anywhere throughout it, when you see that S, if you click on it, it's going to show you documentation that's related to the screen that you're currently looking at. So you can learn all about um, how to create maybe assignments, create questions on assessments, discussions, and things like that. So just kind of be aware of that as well. Schoology has a very robust help center. There's a lot of documentation with the product. I know I really enjoyed using it as a teacher. I was a secondary science teacher with chemistry and physics when I was using it. Fellas, if there are no questions, I hope you all have a great day, and thank you so much for giving me an hour of your time. Y'all take care, and happy Friday.